DevOps Iterations.
And here we are, a new episode of Abnormal DevOps Iterations, and this time is with Michael Stahnke. So, Michael, how are you, first of all?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
And what are you doing these times in terms of work?
I am running engineering at a company called Flox, where we do basically Nix-based developer and IT workflows. So we have, if you think about kind of what Docker did for C groups, I guess that's more what we're trying to do for Nix. And if you're not super familiar with Nix, it's a functional package manager. It's a very different approach to kind of delivering software and working with software. And I've always found it fascinating, but the learning curve seemed very, very steep. And so we're really trying to make it work more fit with the workflows that people understand and already understand and work with and know, and maybe a little less academic from the ground up. So that's kind of the goal.
So your ideal user is a developer who needs the same environment everywhere?
Yeah. Developers need the same environment everywhere. I mean, it could be an operator that needs the same environment everywhere. Like a common use case that we'll see is somebody's going from one version of Terraform to another, and they want to have them installed side by side, and they have a branch that's on the old version and a branch that's on the new version, and they can just switch back and forth and activate which one they want. And so that's like more of a DevOps approach, but then you can have the same thing. You can imagine that with like a Postgres upgrade, where you have a Postgres 13 in one branch and 14 in a different branch, and you're doing upgrade testing and, making sure that everything works well. And that's kind of hard to do with Homebrew, to have side-by-side installations. With Docker, obviously you can do it, but there's kind of I have this container, I have that container, and the only thing you really want different is just that Postgres installation. So, you're running a lot more external infrastructure. And what we found is that there are other tools like NVM that do node management, or RBM that does Ruby or whatever, but like, why not have that for your entire software stack versus just one language ecosystem? And so that was really the approach we started taking, and resonated with developers, but also seems to resonate with people that are doing just all sorts of different jobs in IT. And so, enjoying it so far.
Yes, it is. So you leverage on Nixos for this, right? Or how the whole thing is put together?
It uses Nix out of the hood. We use NixOS internally a little bit, but NixOS and Nix are not really quite the same thing. Like, they're obviously from the same root tree or whatever, but Nix is more the functional package manager that's cross-functional. It works on Linux, works on Mac, works on WSL2, and so what we do is, like, when we build an environment, we call it a Flox environment. If you built it on your Linux laptop, but your colleague's on a Mac, it will work just fine there. You'll get the same versions of software. Basically, at the time when you build your Linux one, we actually do a resolution of everything you would need on a Mac as well, and we just store all the pointers to everything you would need in any other operating system environment. And therefore, we guarantee cross-platform compatibility that way. So, yeah.
That's cool. Sorry for the ignorance. On Windows, you run Nix natively
purely in WSL. Yeah, it's definitely not. It's not Windows like Win32 native or anything like that. That's it uses POSIX interfaces, so it just doesn't work out that well.
Doesn't work. Yeah. Interesting. So, I mean, Michael, you have been around in the IT landscape and world for quite a long time, and actually, what you are doing now is something that, if you think about that, is probably unthinkable 20 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe even. How do you see this whole IT world changing and always evolving?
I mean, how I see it changing is that it keeps getting more and more complicated. How I wish it was changing is the other direction. But it feels like every time we have a problem, we just add a new layer of abstraction on top of it, and we add a new set of tools to manage the complexity that was introduced with the last set of tools. And that works until it doesn't. And, and at some places people were like, hey, I can manage this, it's fine. And totally agree with you. It's not out of bounds for all players right now. But when you're running hundreds or thousands of microservices and you're trying to figure out what's wrong, those extra layers of abstraction and complexity are noticeable. And you're trying to figure out, okay, I'm seeing a thing over here, but it might be broken 8 services upstream, and you're not seeing it until, a downstream effect happens in a different way. And that stuff's complex. And that's, when we when the industry as a whole decided that microservices were amazing, I think there was a pattern applied without logic. There's monoliths have a place and they're great and they should be used in a lot of situations. Keeping one thing online is easier than keeping 5 things online. Like there's no physics that refutes that. So, but a lot of people, they were like, well, we have to do microservices for everything. And I mean, there are reasons that makes sense in certain cases, but if you're not sure you're in that scenario, you're not. So,
Right.
those are the things that I see right now. So I guess to me, I feel like we just keep adding complexity into the situations. And I would like to get back to flattening the stack and pulling out some of these layers that, maybe were needed as we went along the journey of learning cloud native architecture or learning microservice architecture or learning, modern operations and practices. Maybe they were needed on the journey, but they aren't needed at the destination. And so at the destination, how do we start slicing away some of these layers and being like, do we need effectively 8 different things that are doing message parsing? You have a message queue, you have log parsing, you have OTel, you have telemetry, you have monitoring data, you have metrics, you have graphite, you have JMX emissions. Like you have all of these things going on. And you have 8 different tools that are parsing all this. And so like to correlate everything, you have to go look into 8 different spots. And does that mean I want one tool to rule all that? Not necessarily. Maybe I don't need every one of those things. Like, that's more what I'm thinking about is rather than figure out how to manage it, the easiest way to manage something is don't. So what do you, what can you take away? I think those are the questions I'm constantly asking as I'm looking at software architecture these days.
Yeah, indeed. Also, one of the things is that each of those 8 tools tries to do what all the other tools try to do and do the definitive solution for everything. And so we have so many tools trying to do everything, which is probably never the good thing. So, I mean, you see my Puppet, where is it? Yeah. You were a long time a puppeteer. How do you see Puppet going? Where do you see it going? What is his place in the universe of IT?
What a question. I mean, I see Puppet in my normal sphere less and less than than I did obviously when I worked there or even shortly after I left. And there's a new energy right now going on because of kind of the Perforce acquisition and some of the policy changes they've made that I think, kind of turned off the community and not completely understandable. And so now you have, well, what's the future of Puppet, which I think is an interesting question. You have OpenVox and Ben and, doing all the things that he's trying to do, which I'm supportive of. But I think there's also like, what's the demand for Puppet long term? And are there other players or other systems of management that have caught up with what Puppet could do back in the day? And I frankly don't know the answer to that right now. But I also figure at my last several companies, like we haven't used anything like Puppet. We haven't used even things like Ansible or whatever. It's been either Kubernetes driven or it's been kind of you just tear it down and you throw it back up the way you want it. And there's not so much this state enforcement, long-term, long life cycle thing. I know there are many companies that still do that, but it used to be every company, and now it might be 60% of companies do that versus 100%. And so when I look at where Puppet's going, it's really interesting to know. It's really interesting to guess. I mean, some of the ideas that Ben has for stuff he'd like to do, I would love to see, the Overlook and Tech folks be able to pull some of that off. But it's some of those are like technically interesting problems, like not using a JVM and putting the Lexer parser in Go. There was a Go implementation of the entire grammar at Puppet when I was there. And it's like, whatever happened to that? That would be really cool. Is it ever going to take off? I have no idea. Would I love to not run a JVM when I'm doing system administration? Yeah, that'd be cool. So, those are things that I think about and I hope for, but I guess I don't have the same use cases that I had when I loved Puppet and when I worked on it so much. And today I did try to actually run Puppet last night because I was doing something. I spun up a new node at home and it was the first time in a long time. And I was like, oh, I could just check it into Puppet and it'll work. And of course the infrastructure had rotted and it wasn't running properly and, all those things. And it was just, all right, do I really go back and set all this up again? Or do I just go read the manifest and run the commands that it would have run and, get the system into the state that I want to just to move on? And I didn't do either of them. I went to bed. But, we'll figure out what I do next there. So that was a long-winded answer to say, I'm not sure. So
we will see, I guess. In terms of, I mean, there is this thing. I mean, I guess you were a sysadmin a long time ago. I mean, maybe if you work with Puppet, I can imagine. And we used to, install hardware machines and then starting to create virtual machines. And then there is the cloud, and then there are containers. And now basically there is nobody doing more or less system administration work. No, where is the sysadmin? Is long gone in some way. And it looks like basically all the underlying infrastructure is something that more and more is being taken care by someone else. Where do you see this going? What will be the ultimate position of this trend?
I mean, ultimately, there are still system administrators. It's just the system isn't the single server anymore. The system is now the platform of, cloud operations, or it's, some developer platform, or, whatever they're doing. And so there is still a system to maintain, and it's got the same properties of, performance characteristics and quotas and user management and, all of those things that are the same that were on like that multi-system Unix box that, I used to administer. But now you're doing it in a distributed fashion, and that comes with new problems and new complexities. So I don't see any of that really going away. But what I also see is like the days of a sysadmin who understands the technology but can't write code that should have been gone 15 years ago, but there's absolutely no place for it today. And, if you can't write some code to do your automation, or write some code to glue together two services, or understand how to speak to a REST API to go, automate a query or whatever, I don't think you're going to be successful in this role at all anymore. And I mean, I've thought that for 15 years, but, and I've definitely seen that dwindle, but it feels like now, the days of logging into systems and doing, midnight maintenance on a Saturday night or whatever, I think those are mostly gone. I hope they're mostly gone. Maybe a certain large enterprise still has it to some degree, but I hope they're mostly gone. So.
Yeah. I wonder also sometimes, when I think about what I take from, let's say, 20 years and more of experience on the field, and now this can be compared to what can do a younger person starting to work in the IT now, in the, let's say, operations side. And I always wonder how much they really need to know the basics. No, in these times, we keep on telling the experience is useful, it's good to have the good backgrounds and so on. But sometimes I feel like, a person who could be my son or my daughter could be more effective in doing current operations, knowing just what is current now, much better than me with my 20 years and more of experience. What do you...
I wondered about that as well. Like I'm no fan of anything that requires YAML for configuration or setup. I find it to be super annoying. It's the same reason I don't really like Python. I don't like anything that's white space dependent. It's not my favorite. And a lot of modern infrastructure appears to basically be just tweaking YAML in certain ways, but like it's not. It's still instructive and programming and declarative. It's like it's got all these. There's still keywords and tokens and all that. It's programming. It's just with like extra confines to me. And like that makes no sense to me. But a lot of people are very effective with it. And so, if you come in today and say you've been in a career for say 5 years or less, you're probably very used to running YAML for everything and having an ephemeral approach to infrastructure where you can just throw it away, tear it down, rebuild it, whatever. And that's really cool. We worked really hard to get there over the years. But there's also certain experiences that I think a lot of people miss. And it's things like, we were coding a process supervisor, and it's like, well, what happens when you leave file descriptor 3 open? Or what happens when, you kill the parent PID on this? Or do you have to fork, or do you have to spawn or exec, on this? Like, how do you do all, and like those types of things? It's like, man, go pull out your Kernighan and Ritchie C book. That's a better, roadmap for this than anything that has been published today. And this was published in the 70s. And so like some of this stuff doesn't change, and it's still really, really important. And others of it is, evolved really heavily. And so I try and figure out what things matter and which things don't. And I think the goal is like, don't let the cement harden around your ideas. You want to be malleable. You want to be able to change over time and learn the new things, but also you've done a lot of really cool things over the years. Is it ever going to come up where I need to tell you what the difference is between packaging in Solaris 10 and Solaris 11 is? Probably not. It's probably not going to come up again. But what did I learn about that? Well, the way very different package managers approach things, the way very different service managers approach, starting services, the way, and that's just in one OS family, and so you can get that across the board. And, is it useful that I know the differences between, the way Ubuntu packages something in Debian? Not generally, but like, it doesn't mean that it's completely worthless in all cases. So I don't know. I guess I wouldn't trade the experiences, but mostly because I had such a great time, like working at Puppet. I got to package and work on Unix systems of 100 different targets and OSs and chip families and all those kinds of things, and it was really, really cool. And so, is it a super useful thing? Not always, but like whenever there's a weird packaging problem or a weird integration thing, like I probably have some familiarity with the background of it, and I think that's a great starting point. So,
yeah, that's more or less is the same thing that I try to like to think. There is some usefulness in the things that we have learned in the past. And for the future, what are the things that you think people who are coming to the IT world now should learn and should start from?
I think the obvious answer is AI stuff, and I say that with some hesitance in that I don't really know what the effectiveness level of AI will be. I'm a person that talks with venture capitalists and investors fairly regularly. Their excitement about AI is at 100. I go to talk to practitioners, like we were at Config Management Camp a few weeks ago, and they're way less excited about AI. And so, somewhere in the middle is probably the right answer. It's probably not 0. It's probably not 100, but it might be somewhere between 33 and 66, something like that. And some of this AI stuff is really, really fascinating. And, people say, well, it doesn't write good code. Turns out a lot of programmers don't write good code either. So, of course, it doesn't write good code. But if you get better at reviewing code, like what's the downside? If you get better at reviewing code that you're not familiar with, what's the downside? If you get better at figuring out testing and behavior specifications and being able to give requirements with more concise and exact prompts that are specific, what's the downside? Like all of that is upside to me. Some of the downsides might be this code is less flexible. Like it's very much purpose driven for one outcome, and it means it's not extendable as easily. Okay, but that's a downside that I could see pretty realistically. But I think also just even understanding, the foundations of how all this AI stuff works is a thing that people should be looking at. I feel like I haven't spent enough time on it. Could I build a RAG from the ground up? Could I do these LLM models, on my own? And the answer is no, I couldn't right now. And that kind of bothers me. And I'll probably spend some time in the next, few months coming up to speed. I'm not going to say that I'm going to be an expert on it, but I want to have a passing level of familiarity with it and at least an understanding. And so I think the future, in a perfect world, how many companies have been trying to sell you self-healing infrastructure for years, or we do automatic anomaly detection and show you where things are going wrong and all of that. And I've never seen it actually play out in any real way. But are we closer to that with, these LLMs that can parse things and find interesting patterns? Maybe. I've tried a few things and I've been impressed with some of them and I've been completely disappointed in others. So it just, it just depends. But I think the future may be less deterministic. And I think that's actually the hard thing to think about, because LLMs and AI models are not deterministic. And so, if you give them the exact same set of inputs, they will not always give you the exact same set of outputs. And to me, that is
scary.
That fundamentally breaks my assumptions about computers. And so like that's the thing where I'm like, how do you wall that off into an area where you're allowed some non-determinism in a space? Because you don't want things like my backup might have happened. That's not an okay thing. You need to know, did the backup happen or did it not happen? And so that's where I start to get really, I think it's an interesting mental experiment. I guess you start to think about, okay, if there's not determinism, how am I actually doing computer operations? That blows my mind when I think about it right now. So
yeah, same for me. Actually, several episodes ago, Patrick Debois was talking about this, and for him, it was somehow natural that we were going to a world where, okay, these undeterministic infrastructures are normal, and they have their own self-healing, self-corrections, and self-things that will make this sustainable and doable. I still struggle to understand and to grasp, to feel the concept in terms of how this can, we want things to be either white or black in some way, at least in the IT world.
Right.
And I guess maybe we have to be accused of some kind of intrinsic chaos monkeys playing with our infrastructures because they are LLMs or whatever they.
Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating in some way, but yeah, I guess also that will be. I mean, we have seen it all the time. So no, IT is keeping on changing. Some things are the same. A QWERTY keyboard is always under our hands in some way, and that's weird if you think about that. Probably in 50 years, if we will have keyboards, they will surely have a QWERTY layout. That's weird in some way, but at the same time, all the things keep on changing. How do you feel personally in your inner self about this? I mean,
I guess I'm trying to understand what you're at. How do I feel personally about what exactly?
About this IT world always changing. So in some way, also as our careers have to evolve and keep in track with the IT world.
I mean, I'm happy it's changing all the time. If it stayed the same, I think it'd be pretty boring. And the reason the industry can push forward so hard is because of how fast it can move. And so, our job is to be adaptable to those changes and figure out which options that are presented in front of you work and which ones don't. And some things that are really cool work in a lot of scenarios. They might not work in your scenario. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means it didn't work in the exact situation that you have. That's okay. But I look at, even like the evolution of hardware. I was super into ARM a long time ago. I just thought it was really fun. But I always thought ARM was kind of a toy because it was so slow and so underpowered and so small. And then, a few years ago, you saw those Graviton servers like spin up from Amazon, and I was like, oh, these are a little bit real. These aren't just like IoT type edge, appliances and Raspberry Pis and things like that. And then you see Apple, switch from an x86 based chip over to an ARM based chip, and like that blew my mind. And like, the performance increases and how much better everything got was beyond my wildest imagination of what ARM could do. And now, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, is ARM actually going to be viable in any way? I was like, outside of niche, IoT type things, I don't really think so. Or maybe appliances that are, underpowered, like a storage appliance or a router or something like that. But and now it's a general purpose chip that, chipset that is awesome. It powers my phone and my computer. And like, those things are really, really cool. And so you look at, well, what could be happening 10 or 15 years from now? Could there be another hardware revolution, another hardware change? Almost certainly. But you look at, the GPU being used now as a computer and not just as a gaming engine. There are all sorts of things like that in the hardware space that fascinate me. And so, does everybody have a need to do that right now? No. So, just keep an eye on it, know what's available, know what capabilities are. I also wonder what tech kind of dies on the vine, or dies, what becomes no longer relevant. And that's a really weird statement because almost no technology completely gets retired. It gets smaller and smaller uses, but like, there's still people that read their email using Pine every morning. And there are still people that, run commands that were from the 70s, every day or, whatever. And so I keep looking at that like, well, what are we really getting rid of here? Is there anything that's stepping away? And, if you've ever worked in enterprise, it's like you can retire 80% of something really easily. The last 20%, the last 10% takes forever and doesn't ever finish. There's still HPUX running in spots, it's things like that. So, and so that's what I keep thinking about with all this tech is like, okay, we have all this new stuff coming at us. We have all these new adaptation, and like, yes, those are interesting, but eventually you can't be additive forever. And so like what has to fall to the wayside and how does it fall? And, I think we see a lot of that through company consolidation and, portfolios getting all wrapped up and eventually they shutter a service or they shut down a thing. But like those are more business oriented shutdowns, not necessarily the tech underneath is gone, like, are people still using XML RPC to do things? Yeah. Are they still using Corba? Yeah. It is like, well, should they be? I don't know. Maybe it still works. It's fine, I guess. But would I write new things with Corba? No. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a long-winded answer of like, hey, the future's got a lot of change, but we also should probably figure out how to jettison some of the baggage we're carrying. So,
yeah, this huge legacy world where things get legacy almost the same time they're written. Almost. How do you see? Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think the other aspect of it is as IT has grown up, we've attempted to add measurements around kind of, is this working or is it not? And I will say that when I first joined, a big enterprise working back office, sysadmin, infrastructure architecture, things like that, the measures of success were basically, did you stay within budget? Like that was the entire measurement of this team is working well or not, basically, was, are you within the budget that you're supposed to be in? And that has changed immensely in the last 20, 25 years, where now, can you deliver the tech at a certain speed rate? Can you have a reliability above a certain threshold? And what is reliability and all, all of those things that are all measured out now. And I like that we have a lot more goals and metrics around things, but I also think that we've kind of consolidated around a small number of metrics that are helpful, but not complete. They don't complete the story. They're kind of generic, where it's like we measure generic IT velocity, but we don't measure any value of it. It's just like, you can make change quickly. Cool. Was the change meaningful in any way? No metric for that right now. And like the accepted set of metrics, it's like, well, was it a good idea? No metric. Did users like it? No metric. What we have are, we could deploy that thing as often as we wanted, and it was a reliable deployment. Which like it's a fine starting foundation, but like, that's the thing when I think about DevOps, to me, the huge miss was that product management was not included in that conversation ever. It was, we're going to break down this wall between developers and operations. Cool. That needed to happen. It was great. I think it's improved so many things. It's made certain things more complex, but like generally, I think it's been a great thing. And so now we can run this engine at a higher level of RPMs. Like we can do a lot more revolutions per minute. We can move faster. But the problem is that's just horsepower. Like, who's steering? Because there's a product manager usually that's actually saying, here's the technology we're going to deliver. Here's the capabilities that our users are going to consume. And that has not been ingrained all the way through technology delivery. And it's not measured the same way. You're like, hey, we deployed it 300 times last week. Cool. Did it matter in any way? Not measured. Or not in an industry standard way. You may have a product manager that knows how to measure that for their product suite. And maybe even some companies that a whole product portfolio can measure that, but there's not like these industry agreed upon metrics the way that Dora has done with like DevOps stuff and other things. And, and in product management, of course, people will tell me, there's Net Promoter Score or CSAT, all these different things. And yes, I know those exist, but those aren't telling you, did you deliver the right change set? They're telling you, are your users happy with the end product, which maybe is the ultimate thing you do care about. But I just feel like there's metrics in there that we have totally omitted in the conversation. We've totally left out kind of the product management flow in all of this in the DevOps space. And like, that's the thing that I would say measurement and product management are the two things that I have probably spent the last 4 or 5 years really thinking about from a DevOps standpoint and not come up with the ultimate solution yet. But I'm convinced that we need to move beyond kind of the 4 or 5 core DevOps metrics to actually tell a story. And I'm convinced that product management needs to be deeper in the stack and not all the way out only to like the UI level of where a user is interacting with systems. Those are the two things I'm very sure about at this point.
So in a perfect world, you as a product manager, how do you interact with the other stakeholders in the...
Well, I mean, you have to kind of get everybody around the idea that they have a customer, whether that customer is an internal customer or external or whatever. There's somebody that consumes the things you do and that cares about them and that has a certain quality level and a bar of what they're doing with it. Sometimes you just have to go ask, like when I ran a platform organization at Circle CI, we would be asking the developers who were the consumers of the platform organization, what things are difficult to work on? What things are hard to do? What capabilities do you wish you had? And, the answers might be, man, I wish it was easier to debug when we have a problem, because when we have 12 microservices and one of them has a problem, we're not sure which one it is until we do a lot of digging. Okay, well, how can we help with that? Another might be, hey, we use Postgres on the back end, and when we have a blip, 3 of our services always disconnect, but the others are fine. Why do those 3 disconnect? It's like, oh, you're using a different library. Here's the library that the platform actually recommends. Okay, so how do we surface that to everybody? So from a product management perspective, it's still interacting with customers, it's doing user research, it's gathering workflows and feedback, but that's all the way in the stack. It's not just, okay, we're only going to do that for our external users that are interacting through, a mobile app or whatever. Like that you still need that, but those practices are great all the way through. And to me, that was kind of, as we saw things get relabeled from operations to DevOps and then to platform, the distinction in my mind was there's product management in a platform organization. And I don't know if that's actually played out in the industry, but that's the way that I made the distinction. And so hopefully if we, evolve down there, we actually get some product management in there, but we also need to get some kind of acceptable metrics in there as well. So, yeah.
Okay. Name 5 good metrics to.
So there's a few things I really like that are still kind of in the velocity measurement standpoint. I like to look at, from a platform perspective, how much code is unique per service, because the less amount of code that is distinct per service, the more you're reusing other people's building blocks, and the more you're reusing those building blocks, the higher your return on investment is for that platform organization. And so this is a hard thing to measure, which is one of the reasons that a lot of metrics don't actually get adopted, is they're really hard to measure. And to me, like, what % of code per service is unique is a thing I would love to know for every service that I've ever worked on. And it's really hard to know, really hard to work on. But if you're including if your platform team supplies libraries that are, say, they do connection pooling to Postgres and they have all the failover and they've been tested and all that, well, cool. You should not include your own Postgres connector, then just use that. Okay, so that's some percentage of code now that should be shared across everything. And you have another one maybe for sending messages, out to your queue store on the back end, or all your message passing. Okay, that's another one. And so in the end, you have an HTTP, API gateway and a router, all that. Okay. In the end, hopefully it's just business logic that's the delta, and that's a pretty small delta. But so I would love to see a metric of, what percentage of code is unique across these services. I would love to see. I look at things around onboarding quite a bit. I mean, obviously, Flox makes a tool that is designed to make sure that any developer can step into a project and work on it very, very quickly. So to me, like, one of the metrics I like to look at is how fast is somebody making their 5th pull request. Because their first one is usually pretty basic, might be a spelling fix, might be a README. The second one might be, I'm going to add some keys to Terraform, or, things like that are not super meaningful to the business. By the time you get to your 4th or 5th, it's probably pretty meaningful. We picked 5 kind of arbitrarily, but like, what's your 5th pull request? Is that coming on day 5? Is that coming on month 5? Like, those are big differences. And so those are the things that I'm trying to look at and figure out, okay, what's the mobility within the code base, and how easy is it to move around in the code base? How easy is it to work on? Are there areas people won't touch because they're scared of it? It's a haunted forest to type, set up. And so those are the types of analyses that I guess I've spent more time on in the last few years, where it was, okay, what area of the code base never gets touched because people are scared of it? What areas never get touched because it just works? And like, those are 2 different things that are actually going to have almost the same patterns emitting, in terms of Git history or commits or whatever. But you can sometimes figure out, okay, this one's not touched because no one knows how it works. This one's not touched because it just works and it's never had any problem. So I guess I would say percentage of code, what code isn't touched or is touched and why, 5th PR, and then, just user engagement. One of the things that I really tried to work with, I guess, infrastructure teams on is, okay, when you build a capability, they're like, hey, we're going to build this new API to do blah, 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 blah. Okay. Is anybody using it? You still have to have those metrics of, here's the consumption metric of the system that I've provided. And I found that was one of the hardest things to get into, like infrastructure level or systems engineer level engineers. Like they don't think about the feedback loop of, is this being used? Like, is this a feature that I should shut down because it's not being maintained anymore? Or it's got, out of the for 300 developers we have, only 4 use it. It's not worth maintaining. Those are things like that I really tried to push pretty hard, was making sure you actually have that feedback loop and the kind of the product analytic metrics with your service all the time. And so non-functional stuff like that is really, really important. So I guess that's kind of my quick overview. But actually, I am talking about this at DevOps Day Chicago in March sometime. So that's a talk I'm giving. So
that's interesting. Good points, actually.
Yeah.
Is there something I haven't yet asked you, which you would like to talk about?
I thought you'd ask me a little more about Puppet, or like what was going on, inside of, I guess, Puppet was the most fun I've ever had at a company. I will say that. Like, I loved that job. I put my heart and soul into that job. It was, I got paid, but I would have done it for free for several years for how much I enjoyed it. And, working with some great people. Most of my best friends in the world worked there. Like, still to this day, I talk to people that worked at Puppet literally every day. And there was something really cool that we were trying to do there, which was, really get it so that companies could adopt things and absorb change that was happening in IT. And I still think that is a goal that so many tools have. Like, they want to make it so that as change is happening, you can absorb it and make it work for you. I think that's really, really powerful. And if Puppet's not the way that does it in the future, or it only does part of it, that's real, that's fine. But that goal and that premise and those principles are still totally there. And I think that's a really interesting problem set. But I also just think, the fun of working at a shop like that, I know, crazy bugs about RPM that are just nuts, or, things that about different packaging systems that are crazy, or, the reason there's all these different grammars within the enterprise product, all those things are just fun to think back on and remember the debates and discussions. And I guess I would say that if you've ever had a chance to work somewhere where you really, really enjoyed it, like, you should cherish that, because that doesn't happen every time. And so, like, that's what I look back at Puppet. I'm like, man, we had some cool software, but the people I got to work with, that was actually the best part of the entire experience. And now I see former colleagues, being executives at different companies or founding their own companies, or just being awesome wherever they are. And I have connections at hundreds and hundreds of companies because of my time at Puppet. And I think that's just such a cool thing. And I get to overlap and cross paths with them at conferences, and or even when I'm looking to hire, it's like, well, who do I have a network that could actually solve this problem? And I think, I don't know, I just think it's such a cool thing. So you didn't ask me a ton about the working there, but I will say it was one of the most enjoyable parts of my entire career. So that's probably what I would have brought up. But there you go.
Yeah. Are you located in Portland or somewhere else?
I lived in Portland from 2011 until 2015. And then I moved back to the Midwest. I live in Wisconsin now. And so I worked remotely for a while there as well. And I mean, the company was really fun. I'll say that. Like, we were pretty good at what we were doing, and we were just really fun. It was a really enjoyable experience. And I know that not everybody had that experience. Companies are companies, and some people have great experiences and some don't. I was there for 8 years, and I would say 6 of them were the best 6 years of my entire career. So that's pretty
nice.
Cool.
Yeah. And you were at the first Puppet camp, right?
Yep. I was contributing to Puppet before there was any Puppet events. I lived in Nashville, and I met Luke there. And so Luke and Teo and I all worked at Caterpillar at different points. I never worked directly with Luke or Teo, but I worked with people that worked with them. And so eventually we started talking, and they were like, "Oh, we know these people. Do you want to go meet them?" And I was like, "Yes." And so, we sat down, had some beer, and we started talking. And I was very excited about the stuff they were doing and how they were doing it. And that's, it was a very interesting while, because Luke he's a personality, and I'm sure you've talked to him many times, and he's an interesting fellow. But one of our first conversations was arguing about M4, and I was basically trying to say that I was writing a blog preprocessor, and I was basically writing my own modern implementation of M4, and he just thought that was the stupidest thing of all time, and it was. But he doesn't hesitate to tell you that. Let's put it that way. And that was and it was a fun conversation. In the end, he was like, "Wait, you'll just argue back with me?" I was like, "Yeah, why not?" And he was like, "This is cool." So we did that, and he was on the road all the time, so I didn't talk to him very often. I actually ended up talking with Teo quite a lot, and that was really what kind of looped me into Puppet. Was they were talking about just different problems they were having, and I was like, I think I could solve this one. And some of it was like as simple as packaging up some things, and some of it was, modifying a provider to do something, slightly different or whatever. And, this was before they were even on Git. Like it was, you just mail things in. And I think people merged things in Subversion for a while. And then it moved to Git while I was in Nashville still. So that was pretty early, but, and I was playing with this stuff, kind of with Fedora and with, where I worked at Caterpillar. Like we were CF Engine shop at Caterpillar, but I was pretty dissatisfied with the way CF Engine was operating for us. And so I started putting some Puppet in certain spots just to kind of see if it would work and do the things it needed to do. And of course it did and took over eventually. But it was, yeah, so I got to meet them, really early. And then the first Puppet camp that came out, which I think was in San Francisco, 2010, maybe. I'm not even sure. Was it 2009? I don't know. It was somewhere.
Yeah, 2009.
Okay. Yeah, and they were doing this event, and my work wouldn't pay to send me, and so finally I was just like, Teo, if I get out there, can I get in? And he's like, will you run the registration table for 35 minutes? And I was like, sure. And he's like, yeah. And I was like, okay. So I took a day off or a couple of days off and just bought my own tickets and, flew out there and stayed at the worst hotel possible. It was I was in the middle of the Tenderloin District in San Francisco because it was the cheapest hotel because that was what I could afford at the time. Don't recommend that. But ultimately, that was one of the most important decisions I ever made in my career, was to go to that, because I met 25 or 30 people that were hugely influential in what became DevOps and DevOps days and all of those conversations. Jordan Sissel was there, at that first Puppet camp, things like that, where it was like, oh, these are people that I still talk to on a fairly regular basis, and I guess you just don't know what's going to help your career in different ways. But, meeting 25, 30 people that were super helpful. And a lot of them ended up working at Puppet at different times, but a lot of them didn't. And that was just as important to know people that were in the ecosystem that never came to the company. So, yeah.
Yeah, but still, most of the people who were at that Puppet camp sooner or later became employees of Puppet.
A lot of them did go through the company at some point. Yeah,
indeed. Interesting. So, Michael, some person which I should invite to this thing, some interesting mind to talk with.
Well, I guess I don't know who you've had all the way. I know you've had several of my former colleagues at Puppet, and you started with Luke, and that was great. Have you talked to Teo in a while? That would be a fun one. Teo would be really fun. But I also think, there are just so many stories of different people there. Like if you want to dive deep on, okay, how did PuppetDB really come to be, and what was the problem, and what was, how did it work? Like you can go get Deepak and you could talk to him about that. Like that was kind of his brainchild, and then ask him how much I really wanted to not have a JVM in our stack and how much we fought about it. Things like that. And then, or you could talk to like Nick Lewis about Bolt, from the ground up. Like that was one of his kind of main things that he drove was, the Bolt framework, agentless Puppet apply, things like that, which was pretty cool. And like Nick works for me at Flox now. And yesterday he was saying he broke out Bolt to go solve a problem for us in a way. And I was like, that's really cool. And he was like, it's a tool I know.
You mean Nick Fagerland?
No, Nick Lewis.
Nick Lewis. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I remember the Nick.
Yeah, okay, no, Nick Fagerland's a good dude too. He'd be great. He tells great stories. You should get him onto the podcast. So yeah.
So he is the Bolt guy, Nick Lewis.
Yeah, Nick Lewis did a lot of Bolt. He did a lot of PuppetDB. I mean, he was, when I worked there, he was the longest tenured employee at Puppet. But he since left because I hired him away. But so yeah.
Okay, good to know.
Yep. Yeah, but there's so many good people, and you can always ping me on LinkedIn too, and I can make some recommendations about a few folks. But there are so many good stories to tell, and even some of the stories from like the professional services people of the implementations they had to go do of like we had to deploy Puppet and it worked in this way and it was so crazy. And like Gary would have stories like that. Jeff McCune would have amazing stories like that. Especially some of the early people when it was like, the product wasn't all the way there, and so we were filling in things with custom deployments and things like that. So yeah.
Cool. Well, most of them were already in the list or were already here, but definitely good points. So, Michael, thank you very much for your time and your words. Quite interesting. Some very good points about metrics, product, and DevOps. We should talk about Patrick about this, but maybe it's too late. Patrick now is in the AI world, so.
Well, I mean, I think with the AI side, the other thing is like measure your effectiveness there and figure out what you're measuring. Is it engagement on the AI tools? Is it the velocity gained? Is it the less knowledge you need to carry and context you need to carry? Like, how are you measuring if this is actually working or not? And that's everybody has like a little AI budget right now to go play with toys, but how do you know if you're getting anything out of it? Like that's another budget thing or another metric thing that probably needs to come up in the industry right now. And I see some places start to talk about it, but most places are still. But now we have our thing with AI, and it's like, cool, you slapped a badge on it. How did it help anything?
So your 2 cents on AI, how much is real? How much is hype? How much is we're going to transform everything?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super hyped, but there are things that are super valuable there. Like I've written more code in the last year than I have in the last 4 because of AI. And it's not that AI writes amazing code, but sometimes I don't care if the code's good. I care that it works. And I was doing something where I needed to parse a Google sheet and spit it out into a different, transform it and do some REST puts on, some different things. I could write that from the ground up, but I can also just describe the problem and have it output a Go program, and it pretty much just does it. Who cares? Let's go make it work and go do it, And I think that's really fun. But other people, get really mad and they're like, well, it doesn't write idiomatic programs that are like this. And I'm like, if you're detracting a computer from style points that can write something 100 times faster than you, I think you're evaluating the wrong things. Your customer doesn't give you style points for how good your code looks. So does it work or not?
A sort of side question here. I mean, okay, we don't care if code is written by AI or not, but let's say a novel. If you know that a novel, yes, written entirely by an AI, how would you see it? I mean, there are, I guess, already a lot of too many, maybe.
Well, I have to wonder, have I read anything written by AI and I didn't know it? Because if I didn't know it, I'm fine with it. It's when I know it that I'm like, it doesn't feel good. And I would say I actually notice this more on YouTube videos. I watch a lot of educational content, and like every now and then I'll be like, this video is clearly AI generated. And it usually has to do with them repeating themselves in weird ways. Where it's like they kind of have the same key points and they keep hitting them in different ways over and over and over and over. And I'm like, this is clearly AI generated because no one would talk about this facet of like Neptune in this way 4 times in 5 minutes. Like that would not happen in a real conversation. And like those are the things that I notice. If AI wants to write a novel, I guess it's okay if it's good and people want to read it. But I think our ability to generate content far outweighs our ability to consume it at this point, and that gives you in a deficit at some point. But the other thing with AI that really bothers me is like I don't need AI writing my novels and making my art. What I want it doing is loading my dishwasher and doing my laundry. Like I need it. It's not solving like human level problems yet. It's solving computer level problems, and I want them to get out of the computer and get into my life. And like, can you automate my dish, like, keep my kitchen clean? That's an AI problem that I actually want solved. I don't care if you can generate a pretty picture of something. There are artists that are awesome at it and will do a better job than any AI can at this point. So like to that, I guess that's where I get frustrated is like we've spent all this time on AI, but it's only furthering this little subsection of society. And I would like to see us, there are way more people do laundry every day than write code. So how do we help people doing laundry? That's the kind of stuff I'd like to see with AI.
Well, I guess 10 years and you will have maybe some answer in your home. Or not? When do you think we will have domestic humanoid robots like we have cars in every family or more or less?
Yeah, I really don't know, but I like the idea, but it's also scary because of eventually there's an overlord. There's a person that owns that technology or can drive it or can push updates to it or whatever. And do you trust those people? And the answer usually is not really, because they don't have my best interest in their heart. So maybe it's never a good idea, but I'd still like to see it. I'd at least like to have the opportunity to play with it. Basically, what I'm saying is somebody needs to do my laundry. That's what it comes down to. So.
You want the That's
yeah.
Okay. Let's I think about a startup doing that. The laundry maker for you could be an idea. As Nigel told me some in one of the episodes where he was here, he was doing this comparison between AI now and what was mobile revolution when it happened. And he was right in saying that when smartphone started to come out, nobody knew or a few could imagine what they were able to enable, what we could be able to do using smartphones. So full industries like Uber, he made the example of things that before were not simply possible because there was not the tool, there was not the. And he was suggesting that something similar may happen with AI. No, now we are just seeing the beginnings. We can have an idea of what we can do with AI. What you mentioned, the code and the usual things that we do now. But in 5 years, 10 years, when AI will be basically, we will stop talking about AI because it will be already there, and there will be no more the need to talk about AI.
Maybe we'll see. I mean, this could be the fastest flame out ever when we decide that it's got 5-6 use cases that are really good, and the rest of it, the determinism becomes a problem, or the non-determinism becomes a problem. I mean, you look at the different hype waves in tech over time, and some pan out and some don't. And you look at machine learning was a huge hype wave for a long time, and now what's happened to it? Well, somebody decided to rebrand some of it to AI, and maybe that was the same thing, maybe it wasn't. Depends on who you talk to and what their exact definitions are and how tautological they get about things. But machine learning was this huge hype, and then the counter argument was it's a bunch of if statements. It's not really learning, it's more pattern analysis and matching. It's well, that's kind of the same thing. So I guess you look at all these hype waves. Does it change everything forever? Apple had a thing called a Newton that was supposed to change everything, and it didn't go anywhere. But then they did the iPhone, which was almost the same thing, but with a couple different capabilities, and it changes the world. So it's hard to say. Is this AI based on LLMs going to be the thing that carries forward, or is this a Newton that in 3 years is going to be dead, but it was inspiration for the next great thing? Could be. I don't know.
We will see, I guess.
Yeah,
as usual. Yeah. Wonderful, Michael. See you somewhere, sometime again in Europe or USA, I guess.
All right. Sounds great. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. See you next time.
Abnormal DevOps Iterations.